if you ask yourself in your heart of hearts what this feels like, doesn't it kind of just feel like the president doesn't have any policy views? That he's just not interested? That he may or may not remember what policy view he has recently committed to. He says what seems good in the moment. And then maybe a year later or a month later or a week later or an hour later, if it seems better to say the opposite policy, he just says that. Who cares? He doesn't actually hold any views. He just says what he thinks he ought to say in the moment. How do you get to be president with that being your approach to what you want to accomplish with the U.S. government? As Steve Bennin, my longtime producer and friend who writes the blog for this show, as he said about this today, he said, quote, "It's an open question as to whether Trump has any meaningful understanding of his own policies." I think that is literally true. And I think it is an important part of understanding this presidency and Republican politics generally right now. When Steve elaborates this same point in his new book, I think the truth and the importance of this point becomes all the more apparent. Let me show you what I mean. Quote, "Despite his status as the first major party presidential nominee in American history to have literally no experience in public service of any kind, Donald Trump was aggressively hostile to the very idea of a campaign shaped by the substance of governing, and equally indifferent to learning how his own government works. His candidacy effectively served as a capstone, years in the making. A post-policy party would be led by a post-policy leader. When Trump won anyway, his electoral incentive to be more responsible disappeared, but his governmental incentive intensified in ways he struggled to understand. Indeed, during Trump's presidential transition process, a brutal obstacle course for even the most experienced and knowledgeable of politicians, there was an expectation that Trump would shift his attention to the arduous task of assembling an executive branch team. Well, the president-elect defied those expectations, instead launching a first-of-its-kind post-election victory tour featuring self-indulgent campaign-style rallies in 9 red state locales. It was an unmistakable signal that Trump, after having ignored the importance of policymaking as a candidate for a year and a half, he would not change. No president-elect has time for a multi-state tour during the short transition process, but Trump made it a priority. Given a choice between grueling preparations and basking in the applause of his followers, Trump had little trouble choosing the more entertaining and less substantive option. By Inauguration Day, Trump and his team were so unprepared for the transition of power that they were reduced to asking several dozen senior Obama administration appointees to remain in their jobs. Not because Republican officials approved of their work, but because the incoming administration wasn't yet properly equipped. The services of Obama's people were required for the continuity of governmental operations. This included, among others, positions related directly to national security. On January 18, 2017, Foreign Policy reported that Trump was poised to enter the White House with most national security positions still vacant after a disorganized transition that has stunned and disheartened career government officials. One career government official telling the magazine, quote, "I've never seen anything like this." That was because no one had ever seen a post-policy administration try to fill important governmental posts before. I feel like one of the things that has happened through the whole Trump presidency thus far is that us citizens and those of us in the media and those of us whose job it is to explain the behavior of our government and its leaders have spent all this time talking about the incoherence of their behavior given their stated views, given their stated policy positions, given what they said they wanted to do with the government. What if the Republican Party, in the years before Donald Trump became president, what if the Republican Party is a post-policy party? What if they're not about governing anymore? What if their only skill and their only aim now is getting, holding, expanding, and strengthening their grip on power?